I'm so excited to again have my dear friend and colleague, Jacqueline Cohen, a licensed professional counselor, ADHD expert, maternal mental health expert extraordinaire. Thank you for joining us again. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me again. It's a really important topic that I feel like it's getting more discussion of kind of bridging the gap between the two in terms of more research done on the safety of stimulants during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and women with ADHD being at higher risk for experiencing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Just like how PMADs can be prevented, it's the same with ADHD, that if you're aware that you have it and you know how your brain works, that can also help in preventing the experience of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder.
So tell us a little bit, like, what is the difference, or how do you know? Because I feel like sometimes we don't know what's happening, especially if we have a new baby. We're tired, we're overwhelmed. Is it a new baby? Is it a mood and anxiety disorder? Is it ADHD? Like, how do you know? What are the signs?
That's a really good question, because it can be, what is the difference with some of the symptoms similar with depression and anxiety? The thing is understanding that you've had ADHD all of your life, even if you don't know it. With depression and stuff, it, affects concentration, loss of interest in things that you once were interested in, fatigue and all of that. But with ADHD, that in and of itself is not a new symptom, meaning like difficulty concentrating. If a mom is experiencing a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, like that's going to be what's treated first. Okay. If she's, really highly depressed or really anxious, that's what's going to be treated first. But usually what happens is if things sort of start to get better, but then there's still these other lingering symptoms. So with ADHD, we lose interest quickly, but if you're interested in something, then you're interested in doing it. But there's things, if you're not interested in doing it, then it feels almost impossible to do it. So If you're depressed, then things that you once were interested in, you're no longer interested in. But with ADHD, if there's things that you're interested in, you will have interest in it. If a mom has ADHD and she's having that loss of interest in things she once was interested in, then that is a symptom of depression. And then fatigue in and of itself is depression. But with ADHD, it's difficulty activating, and activation is an executive function. For me, I struggle with activation. So like when I get up in the morning, do not ask me any questions. I need an hour of coffee and like watching TV before I can get activated. That's different than the fatigue of never getting activated. You just want to lay in bed all day. Not that I don't have moments of wanting to lay in bed all day, because I don't know, I don't have any plan. I need structure, but it is different.
Typically, it's like a slow start, like you're kind of slow to warm up and get going. Whereas if you also had a mood and anxiety disorder, you might not want to get going at all.
Right. And of course, moms are sleep deprived. So there is that. It is kind of hard to, get going, or you have to pack everything. That makes it hard to get going, which is also throwing ADHD in there. Like that can be overwhelming. Having to get everything together, get everything out the door. Transitions are really hard. And so that may be okay, I'm not doing that today. Depression and anxiety, there is, feelings of guilt and shame, crying and sadness. With ADHD, guilt and shame is so much more intense than for neurotypical mothers. And a lot of this too is if someone is undiagnosed. I mean, I didn't get diagnosed until I was 40. So I didn't know I had it at the time of my experience with postpartum depression and anxiety. With my understanding of ADHD and looking back on my experience, I know that living with undiagnosed ADHD was part of the reason why I experienced postpartum depression and anxiety. Okay. And a lot of moms that I work with will say the same thing, that not knowing that I had it is part of the contributing factor. The good thing is that, because research is the last 30 years, there are more men and women being diagnosed later on in life. If you're diagnosed before you get pregnant, and you're on your journey of figuring out how your brain works, then that is, your experience will be better, right? The other reason why that women are more at risk, because the hormones are connected to ADHD. When our estrogen drops, then the symptoms will exacerbate. There's just more sensitivity to hormones, hormone shifts. And so that is also a contributing factor. What's interesting is that when I was pregnant with my son, I never felt better in my life. So I must have had more estrogen. At that time, like that was the first time my life ever felt fluid, like my day fluid. Unfortunately, I didn't have that same experience with my daughter. I think it was also because I had a toddler.
Yeah, which is a whole nother level.
It's a whole, different experience. A lot of times too, people with ADHD are also highly sensitive. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can be a highly sensitive person and not have ADHD, but being highly sensitive, it's not just you feel emotions more intensely, but it's also how your environment impacts you. Baby's crying, that intensity of that. If you have one that doesn't soothe as easily, of course, at the witching hour, it's also a witching hour for us with ADHD, like it still is for me. It's like then you're more sensitive to the sounds and everything, and it's just much more difficult to deal with than for a neurotypical.
That makes so much sense. And I'm just thinking the moms I've talked to in the past, specifically remember one mom in particular who really struggled with like the sounds. Like she wanted to be there for her babies, but it almost was like she could not take the crying. It was almost like past a certain hour, that witching hour or whatever. It's like, I just cannot do this anymore. It's too much and overwhelming. Much. What do you suggest?
I mean, this again is like, you've got to know what's happening, and it's so important to be kind to yourself. And this is really, understanding that there's no such thing as a perfect mother, where we need help. If you're doing it all by yourself and you're highly sensitive, it's like your body becomes in hypervigilant mode all the time.
It's like checking in, like, it was like, what do I need right now?
Right, exactly.
I mean, I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, like in the evening when I'm getting like dinner ready after like a day of working and helping the kids with their school or whatever, the last thing I want is to make dinner with noise, like the TV on, and my kids are fortunately at that age where I could be like, go in the other room. I just need it to be quiet. Where I know for some people, they're like, no, the more background noise, the better off I am. So I think it's like knowing what we need and how
do we ask for it, and what are ways that we can get it. The other thing too, it's like when you have ADHD, cleaning up in general, I mean, all of that is a executive function. It doesn't mean like I don't struggle with organization, but I totally struggle with planning and executing. Of course, when I lived by myself, it was so easy for me to keep my apartment and everything OCD. But when you have kids and a husband and animals, it's like, it feels like there's just stuff everywhere. So that also affects how you are. When you have little babies, it's like there's toys, there's diapers, laundry, everything. Unless you have help, then you're kind of surrounded by that too. And it also affects how you feel. There can be a lot of like emotion dysregulation. It's really, really hard. And that feeling of guilt and shame, like you said, like with your client, it's like, I want to be there for my baby. At times, it's like, I can't.
I know you mentioned you weren't diagnosed with ADHD until after you had your son, and you also experienced postpartum depression. How do you feel like it contributed?
Looking back, definitely the highly sensitive piece. My son has ADHD and he wasn't diagnosed until third grade, which is when I got diagnosed. A lot of times what can happen is that, parents are going through the process of their child being diagnosed, and then they recognize,
that's what
seems. The thing is like our central nervous system doesn't regulate as easily as a neurotypical. I saw him as a baby. His central nervous system wouldn't regulate as easily. He was the one that wanted at 4:00 in the afternoon for me to hold him in a certain way, like pat his booty, bounce, and walk at the same time. I couldn't stop one of them, or else his sensitivity and needing that calm, but needing kind of a lot to make it calm. Of course, really uncomfortable physically, that is. And then if he's still crying and everything, but I look back and you're born with it. So it's not like it's not there in some ways. Also with inattentiveness, see everything going on around you. Like your brain sees everything going on around you, but it doesn't filter out what's not important. And so everything feels of equal importance and urgency then, which creates a lot of anxiety and paralysis. That too, it's like not knowing what to do. And then too, it's like we don't deal with being bored. Being bored is incredibly painful. And it's boring staying home and being with a small baby.
Well, especially when it's like those early couple months, it's like you're doing the same thing, feeding, changing diapers.
What happens with boredom is like this existential question of like, is this what my life is about? It's so boring. And then how that contributes to like how you see yourself as a mother. It's like, what's wrong with me? And at that time when I was struggling, I hated being a mother. I mean, I loved my son, but I hated being a mother.
When did that change?
It changed when I got better, when things were more predictable. That's kind of the thing
Okay.
too, is like, we need predictability and structure. And there's no predictability in the beginning. And then you're being pulled, like transitions being incredibly hard. So it's like you're always being pulled in a direction, and how uncomfortable that is. The other thing too to understand with ADHD is it's a very complex thing. It's a very complex disorder, and it's usually never on its own. There's a lot of comorbidity with it, depression and anxiety, OCD, and a lot of it that comes from having ADHD. So we're already susceptible to those things if we're not already experiencing it beforehand. The first part until, things became predictable is like a real blur to me. So I don't even know how to articulate how I felt at that time. And I stopped breastfeeding when he was 6 months old. And that was about the time too. Things were more predictable. When I stopped breastfeeding was really when the depression hit. Unfortunately, I didn't know where to get help. I mean, I had a therapist at the time, so I did talk to her. That was helpful, but I just kind of got better. And then it got easier. It got easier being a mom. It got easier. I mean, I do think that when I stopped breastfeeding too, that felt.
What do you wish you would have known then that you would do differently now? Like if you knew, hey, I think I might have ADHD, I want to plan for perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, what would you do now differently?
If I thought I had ADHD, there are good websites to go to that, sort of have your own little questionnaire to kind of see, if that's really how you want to be diagnosed. But so the ADA website, ADDA, mainly for adults with ADHD. And then CHAD too, is also a good resource. Those are really reputable organizations to find information about it. And then find someone, like as an adult, you don't have to go pay for psychological testing to see if you have it. You just need someone who really understands it. Like now, because of, my journey of getting diagnosed, and it is a journey of figuring out. First it's a grieving of, what would have my life been like if I'd have known, like in high school, college, it would have been different if I'd have known and gotten the right treatment. So there is a kind of a journey of a grieving, and then an understanding really of how your brain works and how to live well with it. So it's finding someone who really gets it. Just like it's important to find someone who really gets perinatal mental health. Medications are great. You don't have to take a medication in order to live well with ADHD. Everyone's different. I mean, I take medication. It's a lifesaver for me. It is very, very helpful, but everyone is different. Before you're thinking about getting pregnant and you're taking medications, stimulants to help. I mean, people really don't understand how long stimulants have been researched, and they're actually like the safest things to take. If you don't have ADHD, Adderall, when people talk about like addiction with Adderall, those are neurotypicals. But when you have ADHD and you take a stimulant, your brain calms. So it does the exact opposite of how it would affect a neurotypical. Knowing that you can take stimulants, there is research showing that they're safe to take. In the perinatal world, understanding like what's safe to take in terms of like antidepressants and SSRIs. And that if you really struggle, you have a history of depression, anxiety, bipolar, or whatever, you can stay on your medication, and that is better for you to do. There's a lot of other things too, to live well with it. Take care of yourself, be kind to yourself.
Like, I think sometimes we see these as like weaknesses. We're not doing what other people are doing, but imagine like what you are, that you do differently, and that your strengths in the matter. And there are so many really great strengths.
Absolutely. I mean, generally we're great at seeing the big picture and seeing things that neurotypicals can't see because we see everything going on around us. Generally more creative, then we need someone to implement the big picture.
Again, this is so helpful. I'm so glad that you were able to come back and join us. And where can they find you? Because I know you share a lot of great information.
So my website is www.therapymama.com. And then I do have a Facebook page, and that's Therapy Mama.
And Instagram at Therapy Mama LPC. But any last parting words of wisdom you'd like to share?
Don't compare yourself to other moms or dads. I think that should be true for whether you are the neurodiverse or neurotypical. Embrace your strengths because there are so many strengths, and it's being the kind of mother that you want to be that matches your value system, not anyone else's.
Not comparing ourselves to others. It's so easy to do.
It's not helpful at all, because all it does is like, this person appears to have it all together and easy, therefore then I don't. Part of the human experience is life isn't easy for anyone. You never know what goes on behind the scenes of someone's life. And
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. And if you are watching this video on another platform, please join our Happy with Baby Facebook community. We would love to have you. And until next time, please take care of yourself, because it is definitely a necessity to do everything we need to do as parents and partners and in life. All right, take care. Bye.